Okay, and welcome back to another one of our history videos. Today's video is all about Parliament House. Now, lots of you have probably been on day trips down to Canberra and probably seen Parliament House. Some of you wouldn't and have only seen pictures. But we're going to go through the history of how we decided to even have Parliament House in Canberra and make it into the country's capital, and a few other things like that. So before we start, Parliament House is where they're going to hold when the government's going to get together, meet and talk and discuss issues and make decisions. And in 1900, once we became a federation, there was a discussion around where should Parliament be? Where should they sit? Sydney wanted it in Sydney because they thought that they had a lot of the big, vibrant city with a lot of people and a lot of those big people who didn't want to move and didn't want to travel far to go and be in Parliament. Melbourne in Victoria, they also were quite adamant that they didn't want to go too far, and they thought that they should have Parliament House in their state as well. And a lot of the other states were worried if they went into Sydney or if they went into Melbourne in Victoria, that the influences of being in those big states would have had too much power. So they drafted in the Constitution an agreement. In the agreement, it stated that they couldn't have Parliament in Sydney, but that it had to be within 160 kilometres of Sydney. I don't know why they agreed to that, but that was the decision they made. So they had 160k radius around from Sydney, saying this is how far you've got to build somewhere for us to go and sit in Parliament. And they were going to build their own city just for Parliament and just for that stuff. They were a city that had not been touched really at all. So like I said, Melbourne wanted it in Melbourne, Sydney wanted it in Sydney, and they thought they were going to try to meet somewhere in the middle. Halfway wouldn't have worked because they had to be within 160 kilometres of each other. And all the states wanted to make sure they were looked after and didn't get like one state being so influential by being in one of the main cities. Now, one of the people they set to make the decision was a guy called Alexander Oliver, and he was appointed to try to find Australia's capital, where the capital was going to be. But he done a lot of research, and he believed that warm climates were actually unhealthy, and that he actually thought that a colder climate with like mountain air would actually be a better climate to have it in. I don't understand that reasoning, but that's the reasoning that they had back then. So they were looking through all those areas trying to find somewhere to go. And then they stumbled across Canberra. Okay, and they thought this area looked really, really nice to build something. Now, it's important here to talk about the Aboriginal perspective of this situation, which is that the mentality of the Australian government back then was go and find somewhere, anywhere, and whatever looks good, we'll just build there. Not any understanding or appreciation for the fact that for 21,000 years, the Canberra people had been part of the, I'm not sure how to say that, Ngunnawal people, and only started getting settled by the Europeans in 1820s. But this idea that you could just go anywhere, and if you liked it, well, we're going to make the new city of the Parliament and the new capital right there, is a mentality that is really, I think it's not appreciating what the Aboriginal people and the culture was bringing at that time, and that was their land. So we need to make sure we have that always in the back of our mind whilst we're also talking about these decisions as well, about what impact it would have had on the land of the Aboriginal people who'd called that nation their home at that point. So then they made this decision to go to an international competition in about 1911, and they put it out to all the international architects around the world, and they said, design us a city, whatever the city you can possibly think of. And so they went out to lots of people, and this guy called Walter Burley Griffin put forward this map here of what he thought the capital of Australia should look like. And he was American, and his quote was, "I've planned a city that is not like any other in the world. I've planned it not in a way that I expected any government authorities in the world would accept. I have planned an ideal city, a city that meets the ideal of the city of the future." And those people that do go down to Canberra do understand that it's a very, very well constructed and well organized city that has a really good idea of because they were building a city from nothing. Whereas when you go to Sydney, it's chaos because it was a city that was slowly developed over on top of it, and there was no big plan. But this plan to build the whole city from nothing meant that the architect would have full control over how things looked and how things worked together and in relation to each other and what you could see from one monument to the other. So it's a really, really well-constructed city. And Walter Burley Griffin enjoyed this quest, but the problem was he got this decision in 1911. But when these decisions started coming into actually being built, World War I broke out. And so a lot of these decisions either were put on the back, so they weren't necessarily used straight away, or they would have sort of slowly dialed back their plans and said, look, we can't do that because we don't have the funds or we don't have the materials during the war, so we have to do this instead. So although it's an amazing city, it still is a little bit different in terms of it's not necessarily exactly what he wanted, because they had to make adjustments because of the war. Meanwhile, this whole time, while from 1902 all the way up till it finishes getting built in, I think it's 1922, I want to say, 1927, sorry. That whole time, for 26 years, Parliament is held in Victoria. All the while they're trying to make a decision about where they're going to, what it's going to look like and building it, it is up until then, Parliament had been sitting in Victoria, which is an interesting fact that I don't think I remembered from when I was in school. And it was supposed to be used as a temporary Parliament House until they could build a proper one. It wasn't necessarily seen, this building here, with as much, I guess, it wasn't as fancy and well constructed as what they expected the Parliament House of a country to look like. It wasn't grand enough. It didn't have enough features, but they thought, we'll build this, and then when we're finished with it, or when we will just build another one. And I do not think they expected that they would take them 61 years to build a new one. You can see over here some of the construction. And within those times between 1927 and when they finally moved out in 1988, it went from about 400 people being in that building here to about 3,000. And from all accounts, by the end of it, it was just so big and no one could move, and it was so cramped in there, and it was just not designed for a parliament that had gone from a smaller country back in the 1920s to an enormous country back by the 80s. So it just wasn't holding anybody in the right place. Now, if we did go on our camp to Canberra, I'm not sure if we will, but we would go to Old Parliament House. It's a really, really nice building, and they've done a great job of making it modernized now, and sort of you can do a lot of educational stuff in there. So this is Old Parliament House. So it was opened in 1927, which is kind of halfway between the two wars. And this is what it looked like inside. So like we talked about before, keeping the red for the House of the green for the House of Representatives here, and the red for the Senate, which was quite similar to what they got from the Westminster system. And you can see here that it would look really nice for 1920s, but by the time it'd become outdated by the late 80s. So, and you can see how cramped it would be, like how big the room is now in the new Parliament House. It would have been quite cramped in there. So then they started building in, I think, the late 70s. They decided to have plans to build the new Parliament House. And from what I saw, it was one of the biggest constructions in Australia's history. And it was the biggest construction since the Snowy Hydro link, which you probably don't know too much about, but it was enormous. And it took them 8 years to build. And you can see just by looking at it, it's huge. And there's like parts where it's a hill and there's buildings underneath and there's car parks and there's huge amounts of construction. And it's gone from having a few hundred people in there to having 4,500 rooms in Parliament House. Okay, like I said, it took 8 years to build. It is an enormous construction. I've only been in there a couple of times, and it was when it was opened in 1988, was Australia's bicentenary, and it was opened by the Queen. So she flew out to Australia to open up the new Parliament House, and you can imagine how new and amazing it would have been for those people who were in Parliament at the time, moving from that cramped little building to this enormous building with state-of-the-art technology and things like that. We're not going to go too much into some of the specifics around Parliament at the moment, because that's coming later in terms of the House of Representatives and the Senate. But I just want to quickly show you what it looks like inside compared to the old one. So it's just the modernized things. There's like better microphones, better technology. You can see the speakers coming down. There's better viewing areas so the public can watch and other people can be there who are important. It just looks like there's more than enough space in each of those rooms to really hold the people, and just to stay there. We've got like sunlights in the top part so that it can bring the lighting in and stuff like that. So it is a really, really good construction. And then you can see in here, when you walk in here, they've got two different sides of the of the Parliament, the House of Representatives and the Senate, on opposite sides of the building. And then you have the Prime Minister's headquarters and the cabinet rooms. And so there's and then the offices. So if you're in the House of Representatives and you have to go away for a few hours because we're waiting for a vote or something like that, you have an office in the building where you can go back and you can talk and ring up people from your members. So you can ring up people from your area that you're in charge of, and then the Senate people are over this side. So there's always a purpose to what they're doing over there. So that's what the inside of Parliament House looks like, and that's what it looks like from the outside. So this video is just a really quick video to explain why Parliament House is in Canberra, because they wanted to make it so that no state had any sort of stranglehold over the Parliament by having it in their city, because it really would have made a huge impact on the influence of being able to have all of your people in Sydney. It would have been too much of a help to the people, to those members who are from New South Wales and from Sydney. So this was the best they could do to try to make sure that it was in an isolated city in which you didn't necessarily have any one state that had an advantage by having that there. It is kind of frustrating for everybody that I have to fly in from all the different places to go to work in Parliament, but I guess anywhere they were going to go was going to have that problem. All right, I hope that video has helped. The next video, we're going to start going through the differences between the House of Representatives and all the things they have. And I'll attach a photo. If they have an interactive website where you can go through and you can look at the different parts of the House of Reps, and you can click on different things and what they all mean. And I'll attach that in the link. All right, thanks for watching.